Hello and welcome to This Week at the Movies. I'm Matt.
And I'm Eric.
And this week, boy, do we have a double header for you. This 4th of July patriotic weekend brought two new wide releases, and they go together like sand and milk. We have the very PG, children's centered Despicable Me 4, and the very hard R, not meant for children, probably not even meant for a large swath of adults, MaXXXine, the third part of T.I. West's horror trilogy with Mia Goth. And you know what? One of these movies I liked. I'm giving a thumbs up, and it's not the one that I expected. Uh, but we will start with the first of them that opened, and that is Despicable Me 4. This movie actually opened wide on Wednesday. It has finished number one at the box office this weekend with Inside Out 2 right behind it. So it is a big time for animated films. This is the second wide release this year that is issuing the fourth film in the franchise. We already had Kung Fu Panda 4. Little slip of the tongue there, but maybe accurately reflects my feelings on that film as well.
Maybe.
But Despicable Me 4, it's the fourth Despicable Me film. It's the sixth overall because we've had two standalone feature Minions films. We've also had a variety of shorts. It returns Steve Carell as Gru, Kristen Wiig as his wife Lucy, all the voices of the kids. We have the Minions back. This one features a villain voiced by Will Ferrell that was an old high school classmate of Gru's. And at the beginning, Gru tries to bring him to justice. Then he escapes, threatens their family. They have to go into witness protection. And for reasons surpassing understanding, Ramsbottom decides that he wants to give the Minions some super soldier serum just to see what happens. I think we all know how well that is going to turn out. Gru has to try to live the undercover life. We also know how well that's going to turn out. Joey King voices a neighbor who figures him out and then uses that knowledge to convince him to do something he doesn't want to do.
That was Joey King.
That was Joey King. Yes. It's an interesting vocal performance. I will tell you, I loved the opening song, the original song. I don't know if you were listening to the words to it, but it kind of made me laugh. And that opening sequence is pretty good. And the rest of it, I checked my watch probably 45 times in just under 90 minutes. I'm sure this works great for
so
kids.
Glad you said that.
I'm giving this a thumbs down. I'm sure it's fine for kids. You know, if you have like kids under 10 and they just need to be entertained. There was a whole bunch of kids at the screening I went to. They seemed moderately entertained. I'm beyond being entertained by this. I think all of the rich vocal talent here deserves better. I think the audience deserves better. And especially coming off of just seeing a sequel to Inside Out that I thought was breathtaking and really moved me emotionally. Going back to this, I said the same thing when we had Kung Fu Panda earlier this year. Like, they were clever ideas when they first started. We're long past the point of my interest in this, and that includes the Minions spinoffs, which have always felt a little, the Minions are good for about 15 minutes of jokes. And they're just having them try to carry more and more. And I think it's so that Universal can prop up its theme parks that it's building. But as films, it just does not work for me anymore.
Is it my turn?
Yeah.
Okay. How do I do this? How do I word this? Despicable Me 4 is a movie that does not care about being itself. It doesn't care about anything, I don't think. The concept, like you said, we're past the concept being interesting. Well, they're not doing anything with the concept. He's a reformed villain trying to be a father. There's a little bit of him trying to be a father, and the stuff about him being a reformed villain is kept completely separate, apart from one sequence where Joey King's teenage girl gets him to, break into a mansion with his son with him. And it's like hijinks ensue. And if I cared at all about the teenage girl that's not associated with their family at all, that is not a part of the franchise and has nothing to do, it doesn't have anything to do with the concept. We're just being asked to go along for this thing that takes up time. And you mentioned checking
And
your
they
watch
literally,
multiple
you're right,
times.
it literally never goes anywhere.
No, nothing goes anywhere in this movie. I agree with you that the opening sequence was really interesting. I love the idea of a villain who has a personal grudge against him, who is actually a threatening villain to the point that the family has to go into witness protection. I don't think it was useful the way they went into witness protection, just sequence after sequence of they're in a karate class, goes nowhere. The mom tries to have a job, someone chases her in a grocery store. It's literally just filler that has no direction or perceived end goal. The only thread of a story that we get is that that villain is going to find them somehow and is going to kidnap the kid. If you actually structured this like a story, where in the middle beat, when the characters are at their low point, the guy had turned his kid into an insect kid, like there's a whole story there that you could actually do that actually has to do with Despicable Me and those things. But even the Minions B plot, I watched so many Minions movies this week because I have a 4-year-old, and one is fantastic. I think the something about the CG animation of that being a little dated makes it a little sharper and a little more unique of a look than we got here. This looks a little more soft, like it's trying to do a Pixar thing, and I don't think I'm a fan of that. There's something a little less stylized about it. But yeah, the first movie is pretty clear cut and driven, and it's emotional, and it's a surprisingly good movie for what it is. And the second one, you have this B plot about the minions turning into evil minions. But that actually comes back in the end and impacts the lead villain of that one because he gets injected with the serum and this and that. Okay, the third movie is a little bit more complicated because it's like Gru and his twin brother, and his twin brother wants to be a villain. He's doing this to trick that. It's complicated, it's layered or whatever, but it's still, it neglects the him being a father part in favor of him being like an ex-villain, but that's still interesting. This, the minions turned into superheroes for what? For marketing? They literally don't even show up during the climax of the
I'm
movie. They're
wondering
not
if it's a
there.
part of the. I know that was pretty shocking because they spend a fair amount of time showing you them like getting called back into action, and I was like,
Yeah.
that's when I was like, oh, finally this is over. Oh wait, we haven't seen Super Minions yet. My God,
Yeah.
it must be continuing. But I'm wondering if they have that as a piece. They are literally building, like, I think Minions World into one of the new lands they're building in, because Universal, which owns this franchise, also owns um, Universal Studios in Hollywood and in Florida, and they're trying to expand, and they're really desperately trying to compete with Disney. They've
Mhm.
expanded Hogwarts as much as they can. They're starting to open new lands. They opened Super Mario Land. You kind of have to wonder if the redo of a Mario Brothers film plays into that. And I know Minions and Illumination is getting a big plot in those parks, so maybe they decided they needed more visuals
I,
for rides or whatever, which
yeah.
is completely the backwards way of making things. But at this point in time, I don't even know if they will feel any shame about this. It looks like this movie's going to go over like $100 million for a 5-day opening, and it just bums me out because
But yeah,
it's
it just, in a nutshell, you said it best. I'm giving this like a harder, almost, I'm gonna go with 2 thumbs down, because I think even a kid would be watching a scene and asking questions about what's happening, why are we doing this, when is it over, checking our watch 45 times, because there's no sense of even being able to think, okay, we're at this beat in the story, so we can expect something is coming next. It doesn't even try.
well, 2023 was ended up being such a rich year for animation. I really liked a ton of the
Yeah.
animated films. And so far, we're now over halfway through the year. 2024 has not been a very good year for animated films. I really liked Inside Out 2. There's a couple of streaming ones that were on Netflix that I thought were kind of interesting: Ultraman Rising, Orion and Dark. But like the big Garfield was a slog. Kung Fu Panda 4 was a slog, and this is a total slog. Um,
Yeah, it's like we're trading things off. We're gonna get a year of horror and a year of animation, and now we're back to a year of horror.
I know it has been a really good year for horror. It's just not a great year so far for animation. We'll see what we still have Moana 2.
Yeah.
Makes me a little nervous because again, going back to it's been all kind of sequels. I am curious about the Wild Robot. I don't know if you saw that in theaters. We saw a few trailers for upcoming animated films. The Wild Robot looks somewhat fascinating. The trailer looked somewhat fascinating, so gives a little bit of hope. And Moana 2, we'll see how that turns out. There's always a few more animated films down the stretch, and to be fair, in 2023, probably a lot of the best animated films kind of came in the latter half of the year, from August on. But this is going to make a lot of money, and I just feel like the lesson they're going to take away from this is greenlighting Despicable Me 5. And
well, as long as they do something with the concept at all,
But what about this would make you think they feel like they need to do something else?
Yeah, no,
yeah.
Uh,
Well, our second film of the week, I saw in a preview screening on Wednesday. I actually saw these movies back to back in a tight and confined 3 hour and 45-minute period, which was kind of a fascinating juxtaposition. But it officially opened wide on Friday, and that was MaXXXine, which features Mia Goth. Don't forget the triple X in the middle because it is following her character as she moves to Los Angeles. Now, this is the third part of a horror trilogy that began in 2022 with the film X. In that one, it was set in 1979 on a farm in Texas where they go to make an adult film out in Texas, but instead the elderly hosts, one of whom was also played by Mia Goth in a dual role, begin attacking them. Mia Goth's MaXXXine was the one and only survivor from that film. And here we pick up 6 years later. It's now 1985. She is the biggest or one of the biggest stars in adult films, but she wants to have a long and sustained career. She's now 33. And she knows that her time in the adult film industry is coming to an end. So she is auditioning for a big horror film called The Puritan 2, directed by Elizabeth Bender, played by Elizabeth Debicki. And she nails her audition. She gets the part, but almost as soon as that happens, she gets a package and a tape in the mail from a mysterious client who is being assisted by a incredibly sketchy PI played by Kevin Bacon, who has tried to track her down, threatening to bring her past out. She turns to her kind of sketchy agent, played by Giancarlo Esposito, for help. And in the meantime, it's the middle of Los Angeles, and there is a serial killer called the Night Stalker who is out there stalking people. People are turning up dead, and now people in MaXXXine's sphere are turning up dead in murders that are meant to look a little bit like the Night Stalker, which has a couple of detectives played by Michelle Monaghan and Bobby Cannavale tracking her down and wanting to ask her questions. I will be honest, I did not care for X at all. That was not my bag. I wasn't real wild about the spinoff Pearl, which took the action back to 1918 and was an origin story for Mia Goth's other character from that movie, Pearl. So I wasn't sure how I felt about this. Also, when you're watching the trailers, they make sure to bring up the Night Stalker, and I was a little leery. How are they going to use real life history? But they actually weave that in a very interesting and authentic way to set the mood and the period. I thought this one had a really interesting look. They really kind of captured grungy 80s, both in the film stock and the overall look, but in the way the whole thing was put together. I like some of the locations. Having been on the Universal Studios Hollywood tour, I recognized a bunch of places off the Universal backlot that they were using in that film, including the iconic Bates Motel set, which still sits there. I thought that added to the mood, and I actually was kind of fascinated by the story, the way that it built suspense with a tell don't show mentality that we don't often see in a lot of horror movies. I will admit that I thought the third act came apart a little bit. I was less impressed by the ultimate reveal and some of that action, but it wasn't enough for it to diminish me totally. I'm giving it a mild thumbs up, which is probably the biggest shock for me in 2024. I thought this was going to be the Night Swim Part 2 for me in terms of how much I enjoyed it. And this is actually my favorite of the three films. I liked the creativity and some of the storytelling here. I know people are clamoring that they need to make another one. I do not feel that way, but I liked this more than I thought. I enjoyed Mia Goth in the lead role. She has some fascinating moments, including when a guy out on the street tries to jump her and she flips the tables on him, which was one of the most unsettling sequences that I've seen in quite some time, but worked beautifully in the context of what they were trying to do. I liked the performances. This is the second skeezy scumbag Kevin Bacon played this weekend, because he's also a similar part in the Beverly Hills Cop Axel F spinoff that we got on Netflix. So that was kind of fun. But I like this a lot more than I expected, which I know was a shock to you and to a lot of people who know me, Eric. But how did you feel about this one?
Well, I think I'm going to be a little bit boring because I feel so similar. You can sort of see the third act twist coming from so far away that I actually lost track of it and started letting my mind wander onto other possibilities. And then it was like, oh, it is this. So like that is probably, I think, and not like the performance is decent, but it's just it's a little too campy. I don't know why the rest of the movie, apart from the ball smashing, didn't feel campy to me. It felt very stylized, but it felt satisfyingly grounded. Like I felt, MaXXXine is hands down one of my favorite horror protagonists because of this movie since like Sidney Prescott. Because of those sequences where she's getting chased down an alleyway, because of the keys in the hand with Kevin Bacon, like, and then he's dressed up like he's from Chinatown, and just so many, there's so many little, I love Ty West's attention to detail. I'm so happy that he has like a bona fide hit on his hands, because there's so many people who feel one way or another, either he's great or he's awful. And like I thought Mia Goth was fantastic. Lily Collins was a pleasant surprise. I really liked Michelle Monaghan and Bobby Cannavale. Like their part in just giving a little bit of color to their characters and letting them be there for the purpose that they're there for was interesting. But the thing that fascinates me the most about this movie is the ending, because the other movies, X, and I've seen House with the Devil, I haven't seen Pearl. Nothing he's done has given me the sense that he starts to play with subjective reality the way that he does here. And I don't want to give too much away, but there's a brief break in the ending where we see a hypothetical future. Then we snap back and we progress forward in time in a way that we sort of just said that this future would be hypothetical, but she's almost living out the future that she wanted anyways. But is it real? Like, it seems very much like the police are drawing a line and saying, if you act in a certain way, like it's over, you don't have to do this. And then she makes her move in one of the satisfyingly gory episodes. I love horror, and the gore effects in this are off the charts in a way that will like very much make people uncomfortable. It is, if you are saying that this movie is easy to watch, you're lying to somebody for some reason like that. Anyways, just that bit in the end where she makes her choice, but she's still free to live her life, and she's getting the things that she wants. Especially with that ending shot, they point out that this is a shot for a dream sequence, and in that dream, she is decapitated. Like, I'm so I don't know how I'm going to feel about it over time, because I'm definitely going to see this again at some point, and I'm very curious what other people's takeaways on the ending of this movie would be.
Yeah,
Hard sum up.
yeah. I mean, I took it more as she was visualizing what might be able to happen for her and deciding whether she wanted to go for it or not.
Mm-hmm.
And whether she could make it happen. You don't know if she exactly achieves the level of fame and success.
Right.
But I don't know. I thought that part worked okay. It's just the ultimate reveal. I guess I didn't remember I saw X once, and I haven't really brought myself in the 2 years to need to go see that again. I don't know if that need will ever arise, if I'm being honest. So I kind of forgot about the preacher that was on TV always in the background and how that was going to tie in. I figured it was her, how the killer was going to be ultimately related to her, because you start with that weird interstitial video at the beginning, which I knew wasn't there for no reason. It was there to offer a hint.
Yeah.
That ultimate block and the kind of shootout with those people and all that wasn't to me as satisfying as like the resolution with Kevin Bacon's character.
Yes.
Which was, oh my God. But
and that's how it felt like it was
incredibly
escalating.
Everything was kind of coming together in a satisfying manner. I liked how they handled like the fact that she's an adult film star. You saw a lot of setups for what are going to happen, but it was a lot of tell, don't show. You knew how she was making her money and what she was doing, but they didn't go over the top showing it, which I feel like they did more of in X, which is what made me think that they were going to be more over the top. And in the same way with a lot of the kill or violent scenes, you had a lot of tension building up and a lot of nervous energy, and then you'd have kind of a few big sequences, and I thought that worked pretty well. I was just impressed maybe with some of the restraint. And I think that's been a problem to me for horror films for like 15 years. We kind of morphed. That's what that whole genre of torture porn was. If you think back in the days, like one of my favorite all-time films in the genre is The Silence of the Lambs, and Hannibal Lecter is incredibly terrifying and will haunt your dreams, and you never really see him do anything. You hear descriptions of what he did, but he's like got this calm, congenial English butler demeanor, and you're like, this is unsettling in so many ways. And then he'll say something, and there's fear all around it. Well, we kind of went the other way, and for a long time that was building the tension and building, that's what made Alfred Hitchcock's movies so great. And I wonder if it was very purposeful to have references to Psycho and Bates Motel in that, hey, I'm going to do something that's a little less up in your face here. Yeah, and her hair, because that was really, where we had gone in horror movies is really over the top, grisly violence. And that can be effective if it's done in the right way, because obviously I saw a movie called In a Violent Nature, which is honestly the most violent film I think I've ever seen in my entire life. And but the way they did it and the way they put it together, they managed to make that work. It's just nice. It's nice, maybe not the right word, but it's interesting to see horror films evolving and doing a lot of creative things. Like even Abigail had a very violent and very over the top levels of gore at times, but it was in service of a story that also built some tension and had some other pieces that drew you in. And I feel like that's what for a long time has been missing from some horror movies.
Well, I gotta chalk that up to the director this time, because that's the thing. It's definitely purposeful, but it's almost practice of his art, like who he wants to be as an artist, that his stuff invokes the time period that he's making up. Like you talked about how X is a lot more exploitative, and it's from a time period that's more about exploitation cinema. And the 80s was a lot more about like turning things into campy slashers that did have a little more restraint in the like darker, uglier side of things. And I feel like I definitely think you're right about the Hitchcock references and them trying to take a more tension building, reserved approach to the thing. But I just think it's a product of that director's passion for making the movies he makes feel like they were a product of the time period they exist in. And yeah,
I'm just when we were going into this doubleheader, I was fairly convinced that I wasn't going to like either of them, and the fact that one of them actually worked for me, and the surprise of which one was kind of fascinating. So
yeah,
kicking off July on a good note. It's going to be an interesting month. We have some big movies coming out in July that I'm really looking forward to. But do you have anything else to add about the franchise that loves the letter X?
I would say if you're on the fence about going to see MaXXXine, go see it. Because even if you end up shocked or bothered by some of the stuff that happens in the movie, I think like if you're someone who is willing to watch a horror movie, you'll see stuff that's a little more disturbing than usual, but there's a lot of reward in the tension of the concept. Like, oh, she's an adult film star that's trying to make her way in movies. Like that plot thread is rewarded. And it's not like aggressive or exploitative or gross or anything like that. She is a satisfying, she fights. She's not a victim, like in the same sense that there are other people who are like they try to do this thing with Laurie Strode in Halloween, where in 2018 they have the character who's been a wreck emotionally, but has become this sort of hardened, battle-ready person in order to cope with that. But again, this reminds me more of Sidney Prescott from Scream, where it's a character who knows and sees the rules of how other people act around her and what people who become victims of serial killers are like. And she has survived X, the movie, and she is going to continue to survive. And I think that might be the appeal in people who say they want more of this, even though I don't agree with that. I think when things are good because of what they are, you should appreciate them for what they are and not just assume more will be better. But I just think people should take a risk on this. And then even if they're a little uncomfortable, I think it'd be worth it. So.
Well, that'll do it for us this week. We will be back next week with a continuation. I can't remember. I think we're looking at some of our favorite films. So the first part of 2024. So should be exciting, and who knows what else. But until next week, we will see you at the movies.